We are back from the CBB Central podcast. By the time this one hits the Apple Podcast app, you will probably be 3 weeks away from college basketball. Recording this on Monday, October the 15th, games beginning on the 6th of November. We've got some secret scrimmages coming up. We saw that first result this weekend. I think it was TCU and Mississippi State, Brad. And I know these are always tough things to take something away from, but my heart started pounding a little bit when I saw a secret scrimmage result come across my Twitter feed, courtesy of Jeff Goodman on Saturday.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Mississippi State won that game, right?
I believe that was the result. Yes.
It's too hard to really take too much stock into it because they do a lot of stopping and starting. A lot of kind of lineup experimentation and stuff. But it is always interesting to see the results of these games.
Yes, the tweet from Jeff Goodman: Mississippi State beats TCU in a not-so-secret scrimmage played earlier today. Quindary Witherspoon and Lamar Peters were standouts for Mississippi State, while freshman Kevin Samuels was really good for TCU. We'll have a ton more secret scrimmages this weekend and the following weekend. Maybe if it's I forget when is that Washington Nevada charity game, because that's going to be incredible.
I believe the 21st.
Okay, so that'll be Sunday. That's exciting. I mean, it was also a good weekend for my Northwestern Wildcats finding a way to beat Nebraska. So all in all, seeing college basketball plus a Big Ten Cats win was all I could really ask for. Brad, how was your weekend before we get into the Pac-12?
Pretty good. Basketball is rapidly approaching with NBA starting tomorrow. I was trying to do some fantasy basketball drafts, but previously on ESPN, you could pretty much just go into a live draft lobby whenever you wanted and kind of pick your league. The other night, I was waiting for an auction to start for like an hour and a half before it filled. So I don't know what's going on there with ESPN. If there's a lack of interest or what's going on in terms of their drafts, but not super enjoyable.
Fantasy basketball is always an interesting animal. Fun to draft, not necessarily as fun to actually play the season out. But I'll probably wind up drafting a team tonight because I'll get bored. So we'll see what happens. I'll take your advice on this ESPN thing. That is quite disappointing. But without further ado, let's get into the Pac-12. A league really I wouldn't necessarily call it turmoil, but definitely at a turning point. They've got a commissioner in Larry Scott who's not very well liked. They only got 3 NCAA tournament bids last year in Arizona State, and UCLA. Arizona obviously facing significant potential. I don't know what the best word would be to call it. Sanctions, perhaps, from the FBI investigation that's still kind of running rampant. USC also implicated. UCLA, has so far kind of dodged it, but Oregon. There have been kind of mumblings throughout this trial, although nothing hard that suggests Oregon was involved. So definitely a league in turmoil and a league that just hasn't really found a way to win consistently on the basketball floor the last couple seasons. And it'll be interesting to see if they can turn it around this year. There's a lot of intriguing clubs to me, Brad, but I don't see an elite team in college basketball other than maybe Oregon.
Yeah, I only have one top 25 team from the Pac-12. I know in terms of last season, a lot of people like to kind of value a conference based on their tournament performance, and I like to kind of stay away from that and kind of stick to more regular season in terms of conference strength and things of that nature. But for the Pac-12 to go 0-3, that's a bad showing, especially when the league is already considered by many to be the worst of the Power 6 leagues. I know I saw today that the American is trying to claim that it is the 6th Power 6, but I think that they either miscounted or what? Because, I mean, that's a wild move for them to claim that they're better than the Big East.
Well, if you listen to that incredible Mid-Major Madness account, you would know that obviously the Big East is a mid-major league. So before I go too far into a rant, let's just start it off with Arizona, as we always do, going through these teams based on last year's standings and giving you our standings at the end for this season. It is basically a clean slate for Sean Miller. DeAndre Ayton, Alonzo Trier, Dusan Ristic, Raleigh Alkins, Parker Jackson Cartwright all depart from the program. Guys like Ira Lee, Emmanuel Acott, Brandon Randolph, Dylan Smith, all likely to be rotation players on this team. They also bring in Duke transfer Chase Jeter, who is well touted out of high school, never really put it together. And then Sean Miller did do a good job late in this class, adding some pieces who could help out this season. Brandon Williams staying, keeping his commitment or reaffirming that commitment after briefly decommitting in the wake of the Sean Miller stuff that came down in February. He stays with the program, number 34 in the composite. Devonair Dutrieve, I believe is how we're going to pronounce it for the purposes of this podcast. 6'5" wing who's really impressed early on. 772 in the composite. There's questions of whether Omar Thielemans will ever play a game at Arizona. He was the third member of the signing class. 120 in the composite, an international import from Belgium. And then also they added a grad transfer in Justin Coleman from Samford, a guy who I'm not super high on, but should at least provide some competent point guard minutes for Sean Miller's club.
So I think my biggest question regarding Arizona is who is this team's best player? I know we kind of touched on a little bit during the Big Ten preview, but I think it's worth reiterating now. Who do you think is Arizona's best player this season?
I truly just don't know. Oh man. Oh. I think I'm gonna go with Brandon Randolph and just kind of buy the recruiting ranking and just hope.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of talent across it, but I don't see one guy who's like a clear all conference level player.
Yeah, this to me looks like a team that's filled with guys that should be like third to sixth best players on a team. I think you gotta kind of have to go Randolph, number one. He's someone who was hyped up a little bit in terms of NBA draft buzz before his freshman season, kind of seen as, the Zach LaVine or like the DeJounte Murray of like a guy ranked in like the 50s who could potentially be a one and done. He kind of fails to gain any traction, but there are certainly minutes available for him. There are certainly shots available, and it certainly looks like he's the team's best player on paper. I do think that you could make an interesting argument for Ryan Luther too, which doesn't say a whole lot about this team if you're making that argument. But Luther's a guy who should, whether he starts or comes off the bench, can play the 4 and the 5, stretches the floor, averaged a double-double in his brief senior season at Pitt that was cut short due to injury, and that's why he's got this 5th year for Arizona.
Yeah, Luther will be interesting. I saw someone someone basically call him like a store brand Lauri Markkanen. That seems a bit of a stretch given what he was at Pitt before Pitt was garbage. But I mean, if he can space the floor as a 4-man and give you good rebounding, that's valuable. I mean, I think he could play a role. I think he probably starts at the 4. I mean, like, what would you even project this starting lineup to be? I would think Brandon Williams, Brandon Randolph, either Dylan Smith or Devonair Dutrieve, and then Ryan Luther, Chase Jeter with like an Acott Lee, and then whoever didn't get that starting spot at the 3 is like the close out of your 8-man, and then to kind of close out that 8-man rotation. And Justin Coleman is the 9th man.
Yeah, so for me, with the recent preview that I wrote on Arizona, I went with Coleman, Smith, Randolph, Acott, and Jeter, with the caveat, like I wrote, I think Williams gets the job by the end of the year. I just think, senior that they brought in for 1 year at a position like point guard where experience is necessary. Williams is ranked in a spot where his freshman year production is kind of hit or miss. I mean, you could be like a Monte Morris and be a really strong freshman point guard. There have been other guys in that range who have struggled, guys who've been up and down, like a Matt Coleman last year, guys who have been moved completely off the ball, like a Lindell Wigington, when they gave Nick Babb the starting point guard for Iowa State, also ranked in that range as a point guard. Kai Ashton Langford for for Providence really struggled as a freshman. So it's a real mixed bag in that kind of 40 to 50 range as freshmen, but that is certainly Williams' position. Maybe not even for the near future because they have Nico Mannion coming, but he's a future starter in the backcourt and a very important piece.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm probably just a little more down on Justin Coleman's like playing ability, given it was one of those where it wasn't like every single high major lined up. It wasn't like Ryan Taylor, who every single high major wanted and winds up at Northwestern. Like you can clearly see like a transition production from a really good league in the Valley all the way up. Like Justin Coleman's list was like Texas Southern, UAB, like Texas was interested, St. Louis, like all these teams that were just like point guard desperate, and then Arizona, which was just roster desperate. And so like it just becomes hard for me. Like some of these grad transfers, like every single team wants them, and that makes me feel a little better about how they kind of translate to the next level versus Coleman, who I actually saw play for UAB or for Samford, excuse me, against Loyola Chicago. He was fine. Loyola Chicago destroyed them. I mean, Clayton Custer was by far the better player. So I mean, kind of take that with what we kind of have, a grain of salt, I guess. But I don't know. I'm just not a huge Justin Coleman believer.
Yeah, I just don't think that you can really compare like a grad transfer's recruiting interest in list to that of like a normal recruit, because I mean, Deshaun Murray's list wasn't loaded to the kind of level that you would think based on his ability. Even guys like Trey. Trey Porter for Nevada. His list was kind of light on the high majors. Just even though he was probably a top 10 grad transfer. Keyshawn Woods ended up at Ohio State. I think maybe Louisville was involved, but still not the level that you would expect for a guy who was a double-figure scorer in the ACC. So I don't think it's necessarily kind of one for one. I mean, even Ryan Luther. I mean, who went after Luther except for Arizona? I don't even remember that. So it's not a necessarily one-to-one comparison.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I would say there's not much more to talk about Arizona. I think we could have done a whole deep dive on them. They're just super interesting to me. But I think this is probably an NCAA tournament team. I have them fourth in the conference. I think it'll be pretty close one way or another, but I think they find a way.
So I gotta say, this is one of the teams I'm kind of copping out on. I have them 6th and 47th nationally, which puts them as the second to last team in the field. It's kind of the most wait and see thing that you could do. Clearly, would not be surprised if they missed, but they do have enough talent if guys kind of step forward in these bigger roles to be much better and approach maybe even the top 25 if everyone kind of plays up to their former recruiting ranking. In terms of the composite, Arizona got 1 vote for 25th. That was from Mike Goodcourse.
Yeah, that seems pretty crazy to me. Let's move on to USC. Very disappointing year last year for USC. I think they were better than some people gave them credit for throughout the season, but it was just such a disappointment coming off such high expectations. Just never really right, especially without DeAnthony Melton. Melton's gone, as is guys like Chimezie Metu, Jordan McLaughlin, Elijah Stewart, excuse me. They also but they bring back a lot of talent. Guys like Shaq Aaron, guys like Jordan Usher, Derek Thornton even. Benny Boatwright is the headliner, 13 and 6 last season, as well as Nick Rakocevic, who averaged 8 and 6. And they bring in another strong recruiting class, headlined by Kevin Porter, just an uber athletic combo guard wing who's going to be super fun to watch. And then they also have Jaron Brooks and Elijah Weaver, who are 2 good 4-star prospects for the Trojans. This is a team I don't really feel is a top 25 team, but I think they can certainly make some noise. I think this is a pretty clear NCAA tournament team for me.
Yep, I have them in the NCAA tournament. I have them 3rd in the conference, and I don't think it would be super crazy to have them in the top 25, but that would be betting a lot on Derek Thornton, who I think, is one of the most important X factors in the entire country in terms of what they need out of him versus what he's proven thus far. I mean, his numbers were solid at Duke, but largely a forgettable season this past year after he was expected by most to be one of, if not the best transfer. He kind of struggled with some injuries here and there, but he only averaged 3.8 points a game playing behind Jordan McLaughlin. Now that is his position to lose with Elijah Weaver missing, I think maybe a month or maybe 2 months of the early season with an injury. So there's going to be a lot of expectation and pressure on Thornton.
Yeah, I came in pretty high expectations of Derek Thornton last year and then just didn't pan out. I'm still going to believe in him. I mean, he was an elite recruit, kind of got thrown into the fire at Duke and was fine. And then last year, there was really no reason for him to play with McLaughlin, who was so good. I mean, you weren't going to play two small guards in the backcourt unless he was so much better than what they had at the shooting guard spot, which he wasn't. I think he didn't have confidence, never really found rhythm. I think this year I'm going to buy a lot of Derek Thornton stock. I will say that.
So who do you have rounding out the starting lineup? We have Thornton and Porter, Boatwright and Rakocevic. Who do you think gets that kind of either the 2 or the 3 spot in that lineup?
That is tough. I think I'll go with Jordan Usher. I'm pretty big on him.
I'm thinking Jonah Matthews right now. But I mean, Shaquan Aaron has stuck around. He's someone who a lot of people expected more of as well. Charles O'Bannon was, I think, a top 75 recruit, if not higher. And then Usher, too, played a pretty consistent role as a freshman, played 14 minutes a game, played in every game, shot the ball well. So they certainly have some options there. I think one interesting thing about this roster is it's getting such an influx of talent next year. I wonder how many of these guys, who are the role players, like these guys competing for that 5th starting spot. I wonder how many of them stick around. So this could be a very young USC team next year.
Well, it could be interesting for a guy like Usher if he doesn't get a ton of minutes this year. If he kind of falls out of the rotation he would be the clearest fit to transfer, given he's a sophomore. Same with O'Bannon. So that'll be really interesting to watch. Kevin Porter looking more and more like a one and done, so that should clear some space. Thornton might be gone. I would assume he's back for one more year, like he grad transfer. We'll see. I mean, this team's gonna be really interesting. I think the thing with the Pac-12 this year is there's a ton of really I can't wait to watch this teams. Like, there's not a lot of teams that are I think this team's gonna be really good. But there's a lot of teams where I'm like, I cannot wait to see what this team can do.
See, I kind of feel that way more of the leagues that are more up for grabs, like the A10 and in the AAC. With the Pac-12, I think that they have obviously better teams in those conferences. But I'm not super excited about watching teams like Washington and USC and even Oregon to some extent. I feel like we just know kind of their ceiling. I think we kind of know what they are. UCLA is a team where we don't know their ceiling, but I'm just not as excited about this league for some reason, and I can't really put my finger on it. And I know I'll be watching a lot of Pac-12 games given their kind of standalone time slot on the schedule. So I'm sure I'll get more jazzed up as we get closer to January.
Perhaps I'm just a little bit optimistic for any basketball right now. Well, we'll see. But what's the composite say about USC before we move on?
They are in there. Let's see. I think that they're in at least 2 different. All right, so they are outside the top 25, but they have an 18th place vote from Barstool Reegs.
Yeah, that's just entirely too high.
24th place vote from Jeff Eisenberg. that's it. Oh, and then one 24th place vote from Buzz King.
All right. Let's move on to the Southern California rival of the Trojans, UCLA Bruins, 11-7 in the Pac-12, 21-12 overall. They lose in the first 4 to St. Bonaventure, and they lose that. And the big losses from this roster: Aaron Holiday and Thomas Welsh, 2 incredibly important players, both headed to the pro ranks. Welsh was a senior, Holiday a junior. And this enters a critical year for Steve Alford. We did a deep dive on these guys, so we kind of talked about the rotation, although that has changed quite a bit with Sharif O'Neal out for the year with a heart condition. We also have Tiger Campbell out for the year with a torn ACL. The Campbell loss really looms large to me, more so than O'Neal. O'Neal, I think, a better player than Tiger Campbell, but less important because of the depth they had in those combo forward 3 through 5 spots. Whereas Tiger Campbell was their second ball handler behind Jalen Hands. Now you're going to be relying on guys like Chris Wilkes, maybe a guy like a Prince Ali or a David Singleton, Jules Bernard to be that secondary ball handler to Jalen Hands, and you're putting the ball a ton in Jalen Hands' hands. Which is a challenge given how he turned the ball over last year. So definitely a concern if I'm UCLA, excuse me.
Absolutely. And people don't really understand that the impact of Tiger Campbell's loss is far bigger than how good Tiger Campbell is of a player. Seen a lot of he wasn't that good. I mean, he borderline top 100 recruit, but that's not the point. You mentioned Jalen Hands is their only ball handler. A lot of people have legitimate doubts of Hands as a true point guard. They see him better next to another lead ball handler, kind of like he played with Aaron Holiday for much of last year. He's the only ball handler. Maybe Chris Wilkes, could be that secondary handler. He's much more of a score first guy. Their roster went from very deep to kind of mismatched, and the Sharif O'Neal loss was also big because maybe he and Cody Riley could have played together in the front court in like a really offensive centric lineup. Now there's not as much depth in the front court except for that center position where there's a few guys. But the injury to Alex Olensinski also plays a pretty big role because he's a proven rotation player who is capable and could have filled in admirably for Sharif O'Neal. Now, they're down a couple guys who could space the floor at that position.
Yeah, this very much feels like a mismatched UCLA roster for a coach in Steve Alford, who I don't generally bet on just figuring it out, finding a system that works. They'll play a lot of ball screen offense again, a lot of isolation, and they lose that automatic mid-range jumper from Thomas Wells. They lose that elite creator in Aaron Holiday. And if Jalen Hands was struggling to take care of the ball last season, how is he going to do without having a point guard next to him and Aaron Holiday, who is wasn't great taking care of the ball by any stretch of the imagination, but was certainly better than what Hands did. So it will be interesting. I haven't fully run away from UCLA. I still do have them 5th in the conference, but I don't. At this point, I would say they're outside looking into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, so I think in terms of losing guys like Welsh and Holiday, they also lose Gigi Goleman, who was not great, but Steve Alford loved him. I mean, they would find ways to get him in the lineup. I remember as a freshman, they would play Kayvon Looney and like Jonah Bolden at the 3 in order to get Goleman minutes. So, I mean, he was someone who played consistently his whole time. He was the starting 4-man, I think, for at least most of last season. Losing of the senior like that is a big blow. I mentioned the floor spacing now, but also I thought one of the more interesting parts about UCLA was seeing who is actually going to get the minutes on this roster. They had like 12 capable guys. Who was going to be in that top 9? Not as interesting anymore because there's 9 clear guys who I think will get minutes. Shame for O'Neal and Campbell, who would have definitely been in the rotation, and even Olensinski as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on all fronts with that. What is the composite say on on UCLA. I recall us saying that the composite was far too high on the Bruins last time when we did our deep dive. I assume that's still the case.
Yep. So first, where I have them 41st nationally, which puts them in the NCAA tournament, 5th overall in the Pac-12. The composite has them at 21, which is just mind-blowing. And there's 6 people who have them exceptionally high. Aaron Torres has them 12th. Rob Dosser has them 16th. And then 4 people have them 14th, and that is Kyle Kensing, SB Nation, Blue Ribbon, and Mike DeCourcy.
Yeah, no, I just don't even want to comment on Aaron Torres' ranking of the Bruins at 12th. That's all I'm going to say about that. Let's move on.
Did we read his ranking recently, or was that Barstool Reeves? I
think we read Torres is not Barstool Reeves. So.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it ain't good. Let's just put it that way, folks. It ain't good. Let's move on to Utah. Utah went 23-12 last year, 11-7 in the Pac-12. Larry Krystkowiak continues to just find a way to win games at Utah. This team was never really in the NCAA tournament conversation, but they just found a way to win games time and time again. Justin Bibbins was big for them as a grad transfer. David Collette was solid up front, along with Tyler Rawson. This team is young now. They lose those 3 guys that I mentioned. Cedric Bearfield now has to be the leader of this team, who is kind of that undersized combo guard chucker type, who has a ton of talent but hasn't put it together consistently in his career. Guys like Jace Johnson, Donnie Tillman could step up in the front court after some solid moments in their first 2 seasons. In Johnson's case, first season, in Tillman's case, respectively. But to me, this team feels like it's a year away. They've got a really good recruiting class coming in, but it's all long-term guys. The headliner being both Gatch, who's 122 in the composite, a skinny but highly talented wing from Arizona. So I think, to me, this Utah team is in year-away mode. But it wouldn't stun me if the other Coach K found a way to keep him interesting.
Yeah, I think that Larry Krystkowiak is one of the most underrated coaches in the entire country. How kind of quickly he flipped that Utah program, got all those pros in, guys like Jakob Pertl, Kyle Kuzma, Dylan Wright, then these like 4-year studs like Jordan Loveridge as well. You know, one of my favorite teams to watch. That 3 or 4 years ago when they had the Wright, Kuzma, Pertl team there. But for this upcoming season, I don't see how anyone can think that this team is going to be, really any good. I don't. You mentioned all like the best parts of this Utah team last year, and it was Justin Bibbins, David Collette, and Tyler Rawson. None of them are here. Guys, I think that there's a lot of hype about Charles Jones, who's like a scoring combo, if I'm not mistaken. I guess he and Bearfield is the starting backcourt, and then a lot of these kind of under the radar freshmen really need to step forward. I think Donnie Tillman could even be their best player. I think that's not an unreasonable statement there at that power forward spot. I do think it's very interesting that they went with Novak Topalovic as a grad transfer when they had a promising, like a rising sophomore or junior in Jace Johnson at the center position to kind of block him. That was a surprising move there. I thought, if you're going to add a graduate transfer, maybe one at the 3 or the 4, or even like a pass first point guard even could have been a good fit. So this is a very strange roster. I don't have a very good feel for it.
Yeah, I would agree that it doesn't make a ton of sense. And it's kind of weird not to put all this confidence in Jace Johnson, especially in a year where you feel like you're rebuilding. I mean, we don't see it the same way these coaches will always see it. That's for sure. And I'm sure if Jace Johnson starts winning minutes, they're not going to keep him off the floor. If he's the better player, he will play. And Pavlovich just helps them with some depth up front, especially if Johnson isn't ready to be that guy. I don't think he took the step last season that some people were expecting, but sometimes it takes a couple of years for big guys, especially raw ones.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that if Johnson's playing better, they're still going to go with Topalovic, which also raises the question of why did Topolovic? Why did Topolovic go there if there's a legitimate chance that he's the backup center? There were plenty of teams that could have used a starting center, or at least one that was going to play like 20 minutes a game.
No, I completely agree. I would guess he winds up starting the season there, but we'll see if he finishes the season as that starter. And if they realize they're in kind of a rebuild, then we'll certainly see that perhaps kind of shift.
So, where do you have this Utah team?
I have them 9th, ahead of Oregon State, which Oregon State probably has more talent, but I'll just bet on Larry Krystkowiak.
I put them 10th and 104th nationally, which, I mean, I think my gut instinct is to say that that's a little low, but I don't have a reason for you why they would be any higher. Like I don't like when people just say, I'm putting Team X here because they're always this good. You have to have some sort of reason. Like I think Villanova is going to be good, even though they lost their 4 best players because Eric Paschall is going to break out. I really like Cole Swider, Colin Gillespie's underrated, etc. I don't know what my reasoning would be as to why Utah would kind of perform to their normal standard under Krystkowiak.
Yeah, that would be exactly where I stand. So let's move on. The next team to touch on in this podcast is the Stanford Cardinal. An up and down season last year. Came in with a lot of expectation under Jared Haas after a really good recruiting class. Completely fell flat in their face early in the season. Lost to a couple of Big Sky opponents. Then found a way late. Started making a push. They had that game against Arizona at home that I think they wound up losing that game, but that was the chance for them to really push themselves in the NCAA tournament discussion. They weren't able to do so, but they certainly showed some bright moments. They were a different team once KZ Okpala was able to become eligible. He had some issues getting cleared by the NCAA. Once he was, this was a different team. That combo forward, super athletic. And while they lose Reed Travis, they lose Dorian Pickens and Michael Humphrey. I'm really excited about this team. This team is really young. They have 3 players who aren't sophomores or freshmen on this roster, and those would be Josh Sharma, who is a reserve big man, Marcus Sheffield, who sat last year and was a 6-point-a-game player as a sophomore 2 years ago, and Trevor Standback, a little used big man. The rest of this roster is all freshmen and sophomores. An outstanding class coming in this year. Cormac Ryan, Bryce Wills, Jaden Dallaire, Keenan Fitzmaurice, and Lucas Kisunias. All of them are high-level recruits. Ryan and Wills are especially talented in the backcourt, and then Dallaire, this versatile wing who reclassified into this 18 group. This backcourt has a chance to be just loaded with guys like Davis and Ryan and Wills, as we mentioned before, and then they can go with these small, super versatile lineups with Okpala and De Silva as your 4 and your 5. I want to buy the Stanford hype. I really do.
Yeah, I thought that Stanford was going to be very good last year, and they were one of the hardest teams to peg throughout the season because they're this projected top 45, top 50 team. Like everyone's hurt or out. They take all these losses, then they get guys back, and then they're really good, but it's beyond repair. Like they've already taken too many losses, and then they still took bad losses after that. Like pretty sure that they lost to Cal, which I think gave me a strike in the rush to court eliminator challenge game that I was very, very upset about. So even when they got healthy, they were still kind of an enigma. It almost went from them being so underrated to so overrated. It really went from overrated to underrated to overrated again. This is another team I don't really know where to stand. I really like Dejon Davis. Whenever I've watched Marcus Sheffield, I've always liked him as a kind of offensive spark, like a shot creator. And you mentioned all of the collection of wings that they have. I'm taking kind of a conservative approach here. I think they're probably a year away. I have them 76th nationally, which puts them 8th in the Pac-12.
Yeah, so I have them a little bit higher than that. I have them at 6 ahead of Arizona State and Colorado. I think that's a pretty tight-knit grouping. So I'm just kind of buying the small ball that they can play and the athleticism, but it becomes tough. You say they're a year away. Well, Dejon Davis could leave after this season. So could Akpala and even possibly De Silva. I mean, they have guys who could leave early, and all of a sudden it becomes a little tough to build momentum. They have Tyrell Terry in this next class. He's really good. So you have to love what Jared Haas is doing on the recruiting trail, and certainly using Stanford's advantages to his own benefit and really recruiting at a high level. But you do start to wonder, how do you really get it rolling if you keep losing two talented guys a year like you lose Reed Travis? I mean, where would you have these guys with Reed Travis theoretically? Would it change you too much? I don't know if it. I think it would probably move. I would probably move him up 1 or 2 spots.
Oh, I think that you would have to move up a ton. I mean, that's an all Pac-12 level center that you're slotting in there instead of a guy like Josh Sharma, who hasn't really been kind of tested too much throughout his career. So I mean, that's a very good point, very good guard in Dejon Davis with all this wing talent, and then this all Pac-12 level center. I think that they would be knocking on the door of the top 25.
They'd definitely be in the mix up there. I don't know if I'd go that far. Maybe I'm just doing the weird read the analytics and say Reed Travis actually isn't good because they were the same with him as without him on on-off numbers, which are kind of a stupid thing to play, but it is something that was played many times for me whenever I talked about Reed Travis being one of the best players in the country last year. So we'll see. I mean, I think this team could be an NCAA tournament team if everything breaks right. I think they have the talent. I just would not bet on it going into the season.
And in regards to the thing that you mentioned about, maybe Davis, Akpala, or Oscar De Silva, maybe they get a little too good and end up going to the NBA after this year. Hard to plan for next year. I mean, that's the big risk. These unexpected early entries we saw with Boston College, a team that was a year away. It could have easily been a top 25 team this year if Jerome Robinson had returned. That would have been all 5 starters, 2 of which are probable NBA players in Robinson and Kai Bowman. Robinson leaves. Boston College back down the ACC standings. Wake Forest last year looking like a potential top 25 team. John Collins leaves, earlier than people expected when they brought him in, being a 2 and done. And then I just had one more example that I forgot.
No, we talked about it a ton on the podcast. It's so tough.
Oh, I got it. Sorry. Penn State.
Tony Carr, yes, indeed.
Tony Carr, top 20, wherever. But yes, go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurdly tough. And I think when you're recruiting as high a level as they are, you worry a little less just because it's not like with Penn State, how do you possibly ever replace a Tony Carr? Whereas like with Stanford, like obviously Dejon Davis is terrific, but you have Tyrell Terry in this coming class. You already have Bryce Wills and Cormac Ryan, who are top 75 recruits. Like you're going to have some depth behind them. And that's how you have to win, is you have to kind of outrun it. But it is very tough, especially for these non-traditional powers to lose these guys early. Because, even if Kentucky and Duke don't expect one guy to go pro, they can always get out and go get a kid. Like Arizona's scraped together roster is still better than most of the Pac-12. Schools
Absolutely. And then look at like St. John's too. Like what if, the Red Storm are building for this huge year. Everyone's super hyped. Mustafa Heron's coming in. What if Shamori Pons left early? Back down to 9th in the Big East.
It's wild. No, it's super interesting. So definitely something that I will be monitoring with this Stanford team. But I'm going to be watching them a lot. I think they're going to be really fun. They're super athletic. They're very talented, and I like Jared Haas. I think he's a really good coach. I think we'll see what they're made of this year. But I think they increase on their win total from last year. I think they win more than 19 games. That's my hot take.
I don't necessarily disagree. Who's next? Do we have Arizona State next?
No, we have Oregon. Arizona State fell so far because they were just so bad down the stretch. We're not going to get to Arizona State until like after Oregon and Washington. Then we'll finally get to Arizona. Let's do Oregon. The favorite, I think, in both of our minds. We did a deep dive on these guys, so we can keep it a little bit brief. Peyton Pritchard back, and then obviously this recruiting class that has been discussed ad nauseum, whether it's Bull, whether it's guys like Will Richardson, whether it's Francis Okoro, who's super athletic, Luke King. They bring back Kenny Wooten, who is really good. So this team is young, but it's got a ton of talent. And they also had a grad transfer in Ehab Amin, who will help out this program just because of his experience, his energy on defense as a combo guard. This team has top 15, top 5, even top 10 upside in my mind.
Yeah, I am not as high on Oregon as a top 15 upside. I think that they are the clear favorite. I think that they are a clear top 25 team, but they are relying a lot on freshmen, especially a guy like Luke King, to be that kind of secondary scorer on the wing. Peyton Pritchard will probably have the scoring and facilitating duties as their best player. Bol as the best prospect is a very unique kind of package on the interior. It is very worth watching that Bol has a reputation for not always playing hard. So that's something that even though he's a great prospect, you don't want him to turn into like an Isaiah Austin or a Cameron Ridley or a Chris Walker. These guys who are have such great upside, even like a Miles Turner. But their prospect kind of outshines their team impact and their production, even as top 10 freshmen. Even like a Steven Adams, even like Andre Drummond wasn't very good at UConn compared to the expectations placed upon him and how good he's been as an NBA player. So that is something that's certainly worth watching. I know a lot of people think that Kenny Wooten could play with Bol. I'm not sure if that's really how Oregon plays. I mean, I guess Boucher and Bell would be the easy comparison, but it's not a direct 1-to-1. I think Bell and Boucher are both more versatile on the defensive end and more mobile than Wooten and Bol.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think the guy I want to touch on before we go off of Oregon is Bol. And how do you see him impacting the game in college this season? Because there's been a lot of talk. Can you move him off the block? He's so skinny. Is he a guy who's just going to wind up kind of being like an Isaiah Austin type shooter and then kind of long arm swatter to try to block some shots? I mean, to me, it's really interesting because he's such a unique talent, not like one we've really ever seen in college athletics. I think Isaiah Austin is probably the best comparison to a guy we've seen coming out of high school. But Bol to me has significantly more upside. So what are your expectations from Bol before we get to what we see Oregon doing this season?
Maybe like 11 points, 7-8 rebounds, like 4 blocks a game.
How much do you think he contributes to winning?
That's the thing. I mean, I just went through almost every like top 10 recruit center that I could think of, with the exception of like Nerlens Noel, who certainly impacted winning, and Bamba. So I mean, he is a shot blocker. He's not as athletic as those two, but he's more skilled offensively than Bamba and Noel. It's really tough to tell. I don't think he impacts it as much as even the veterans on this team. I think Oregon would be a better team without Bol, certainly than they would without Peyton Pritchard, and maybe even without. I think Oregon is better with if they had Luke King and not Bol, as opposed to Bol and not Luke King.
Wow. I would not say that just because of kind of Luke King's reputation plus his injury history. But it'll be interesting. I mean, Bol is, as we've talked about many times, super talented, but also, flawed at this level right now. So we will certainly see what happens there. Where does the composite see Oregon? We both have them winning the league. Where do you see them nationally, though, Brad?
Personally, I have them at 24 nationally, which could be a little low. But the composite has them at number 15. We'll get into who are the outliers. I mean, personally, maybe I am being a little too harsh on Bol. I've seen a variety of opinions on him from someone who's going to be like a top 20 NBA draft pick to one who's going to be like a top 5. But okay, we have the people with Oregon the highest. Blue Ribbon has them at 9, which I think is absurd, personally. And the only people with Oregon outside the top 25 are Jeff Eisenberg, Barstool Reeves, and Aaron Torres. And then a few people have them at 13 or 14, but they come in at number 15.
Yeah, I think 15 is probably right around where I will have them preseason. I'll do a ranking at some point when I get the time. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really interesting team to watch, as I've said with so many of these teams, because they're talented but flawed in so many ways. Let's move on to the Washington Huskies, another team that we did a deep dive preview on. Washington, our consensus on these guys was they run it back and they'll improve, but we didn't see them necessarily living up to the hype that a lot of preseason rankings are giving them. Have you seen anything that would make you change that opinion so far?
Nope. Because I think an easy comparison would be Seton Hall from last year, but Seton Hall was much better in 2016 than Washington was, or Seton Hall was much better in 2017 than Washington was in 2018. The Pirates famously were like an 8 seed, 8 or 9 seed, I think, and then they brought everybody back. Now they brought Delgado, Desi Rodriguez, Kadeem Carrington. Many people, myself included, had them close to the top 10. I think I had them at 10 or 11. And they ended up being just like a solid top 25 team. Washington was an NIT team last year. They bring everybody back, and you could expect some improvements from guys like Hamir Wright and Jalen Noel entering their sophomore seasons. But I don't think that's enough to jump them from middle NIT to top 25.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. I think they're an NCAA tournament team. I think I'm still gonna have them at 2 in the Pac-12 over USC. That'll be pretty tight for me. But yeah, I mean, they've got a nice core. They've got a really good coach. I will generally say, playing the zone to me, I think it improved them. I think it made them better than they were last year, and it might mean their growth is a little slower than you might expect from some of these guys, because the zone let them grind out wins that they aren't going to be that they'll still do this year, even though they'll be better offensive players. I don't know that I don't know. I think there's a little bit of a factor here where the zone stops you from falling as precipitously when you don't have the talent, and now that they have the talent, that it won't look like as big of an improvement as it truly is. It might be more of an improvement based on what the Ken Palm said than what their record really did.
If so,
if that makes sense.
I completely agree. I mean, their Ken Palm was probably lower than what they were actually in terms of talent. In terms of the composite, let's see where the Washington Huskies fall. They fall at number 24, which I think is a little too high. Personally, I have them at 31, which puts them second in the Pac-12, sandwiched between Oregon and USC. In terms of the outliers, we have Kevin's old rankings, who had him at 19. That was the second highest. Buzz King has him the highest at 16.
Yeah, no, that's too high. My 19 is far too high. I will put that out there. Let's move on to Arizona State. An Arizona State team that came out guns blazing last season, beating Kansas, beating several top-tier teams. Really were seen as an elite team in college basketball early on, and then they just completely fell off the face of the earth. Lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Wound up 8-10 on the Pac-12. There was a lot of discussion that they shouldn't have even made the NCAA tournament, but those quality wins early were enough to push Bobby Hurley's team over the hump. But now it's a completely different looking team. This was quote-unquote guard U with Trey Holder and Shannon Evans, Cody Justice even, Remy Martin rounding out that guard unit. And with these Evelyn Martin, that whole unit's gone. Now it's a bit more of a big man-oriented team. You also have Rob Edwards and Lucian Dortz who will come in at the guard spot. Brad, what say you on the Arizona State Sun Devils?
I'm actually very high on this team. I have them 4th and 39th nationally. I think that, this is absolutely a polar opposite team in terms of where they were last year, playing small lineups with 4 guards, 3 guards at all times, sometimes 4 guards. Now they have a lot of like long and athletic wings, guys like Kamani Lawrence, who could see a bump as a sophomore, Tayshaun Cherry, who was a borderline 5-star recruit at 3 and 4. You mentioned Dort and Edwards, who will definitely be capable, like starting caliber pieces. Probably one of those guys comes off the bench, but Remy Martin is an excellent point guard who showed a lot of flashes as a freshman. Now with all the minutes available for him, he can really take a step forward. And then in terms of the front court, Romello White and Daquan Lake were both solid last year. White especially as that redshirt freshman. Both of them are back. And then you get Zylan Cheatham, who I really liked during his time at San Diego State. He's like an energy rebounding type of big. It'll be interesting to see how he kind of meshes with White. I think he's mobile and athletic enough to be a solid defensive pair with White. I just don't know if he has the offensive skill to be the full-time power forward, but then they can slide Cherry or Lawrence down to the 4 and slot Edwards in at that 3 spot.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be interesting because they're super athletic. They're deeper than I think they were last season. The guard unit does leave a bit to be desired. To me, it's basically Dortz, Edwards, and Remy Martin as your 3 guards that you want to play for 2 spots for 90% of the time. Elias Valtanen didn't, set the world on fire to me. I guess you could play Kamani Lawrence at the 2. I don't love that idea. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think there's been a lot of hype about Dortz coming into the season, and I wasn't a guy who was super high on him coming out of high school from the little tape that I did watch. So it'll be. I'm not buying him. I guess I'm not buying him and Rob Edwards, and as a result, I'm a little lower on this team. But it'll be quite interesting because, as you said, Cherry's a really interesting recruit. White and Lake were excellent last season. Romello White was really good as like a 5. I think that's the interesting thing. Is like, do you want to bring more bigs onto the floor when a lot of these bigs were most successful by playing in these small ball lineups and 4 out, 1 in? So I think they're a team that I'm really just going to have to watch the first 10 games of the season and get a feel for.
Yep, and I think that this team would have been, in better shape depth wise if they landed one of the grad transfers that they went after. I know that they went after a Tremaine Isabel at that point guard spot, and they also, I believe, went after Shadrick Casimir from Iona, who ended up at Florida Gulf Coast. Better situation for him because he's going to start there, but he would have been a really nice piece to just bring off the bench, play 10 to 15 minutes, add some depth in case of an injury on a NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think said Casimir can play in the Pac-12. He's a 5'9" standstill shooter. I think he was one of those guys who was going to get overrated in the grad transfer process. Like, he's super useful on a team with good offensive spacing, who's especially on a mid-major where he can just get shots off. But he used to be explosive, and he had like 3 hip surgeries, and now he's just not explosive. So to me, he definitely made the right call. I will just say that. But it would have helped. It would have helped the spacing, if nothing else. He would have been a good leader. He's a really good kid. But yeah, they could have definitely used a grad transfer guard. He could have played the rotation. Just been useful as much as anything. I'm sure they made a call to Ryan Taylor at Northwestern. He would have been like a perfect fit, even if he's not playing point guard, just because he's not a point guard. Even if you could play Dort at the point guard a little bit, but Taylor, just a high level shooter, can create his own shot. I think that would have been a perfect fit as well.
And then for next season, they got Alonzo Verge, who's a junior college transfer. He was a top 100 recruit, one of those guys. Whenever you would check the top 100, top 150 rankings, he would still have undecided, and there was no kind of word on where he was headed because he's headed to a JUCO, and that's a pretty solid pickup there. Give them another offensive weapon in the backcourt and that much needed backcourt depth.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited about Verge. He's going to be a terrific player. Comes out of Chicago, very highly touted. Arizona State, I have 7th right now behind Stanford. I could be convinced to swing that the other way, but I think they could really sneak up probably into. I think 4th would be the highest you could realistically have them preseason. I think they have to be behind USC preseason, but I don't think they have to be behind Arizona. I think that'd be the highest you could go.
Yep, and I have them 4th and 39th, which puts them, I believe, as a 9 seed. And then in terms of the composite, one person has them ranked, which I don't hate it. It is a little aggressive, but I don't hate it, and that is John Rothstein has them at 23rd.
Well, I think that's probably just because John Rothstein. I'm not going to say what I was going to say, but he's a bit of a shill for Bobby Hurley. Let's just say that.
A little starstruck.
Yeah, just a bit. It also helps to get every single scoop.
New Jersey guy, and then Rothstein's like a New Yorker, right? So it's
yeah, no, it's pretty funny. It is pretty funny for the way he fawns over his fanboy son, Bobby Hurley. We'll see what Hurley can do this year. He has some work to do after it looked like he had fully established himself as a star in this business, and then things just didn't go well down the stretch. We'll see if he can.
They were rated third, and they were like the clear top 3 team in the country. You were crazy if you didn't rank them top 3. Then the offense just fell right off a cliff.
I was one of the first people on Twitter to tweet, "Hey, there's a not crazy scenario in which this team just doesn't make the NCAA tournament," and that scenario pretty much came true. And then they made it by the skin of their teeth. So I was right. I just was wrong.
I mean, winning at Kansas. I mean, winning at a number 1 seed is how you erase all kind of late season errors.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, that's why they made the tournament, was that the committee proved that they care as much about November wins as March wins, which I think is reasonable. I know a lot of people have said, "Oh, you have to weight the wins." I think in a certain way you do, but at the same time, I think if you win a game in November, it has to mean a lot. I mean, you have to. I think you should be balancing in how a team's playing now, but at the same time, I think you have to. I think you have to value those wins, and when you get a big win like that, it's just going to be It's going to be really, really, really interesting to see kind of the precedent that was set by that team. Let's just say that.
Yeah, you just got me going, because the one thing in the world that I am most sure that I am right on is that wins in November and December have to be weighted equally in terms of wins later in the season. I have never been more sure about anything in my entire life. Because why else would anybody watch? Or why else would you even play? Why would Arizona State even go to Kansas if it wasn't going to count as much? Just have Northern Arizona come in. There's no incentive if the games aren't weighted equally. And if that Arizona State at Kansas win didn't mean anything, then why would any team ever challenge himself like that? It makes no sense.
I would tend to agree. I do just think that it is important to value how a team is playing right now. I think that should always be a separate factor. If a team can win every game but can't even finish 500 in the worst power conference league. I mean, what did that say? This team was not an NCAA tournament team by the end of the year. But I think that kind of concludes my rant for the day.
And I'm going to cut my rant short, because I'm sure you guys will hear it weekly when we get to February and March.
All right, let's move on. 3 more teams to get to. First one of that group is Colorado. The Buffaloes were always going to be in a rebuild last season under Tad Boyle, and they went 17-15, 8-10 in the Pac-12. They had some bright moments throughout that season, but this was a very young team, and we knew that coming in. McKinley Wright was terrific, though. That was obviously the biggest takeaway anyone was going to have from that team, was how good he looked, was the future of that program. Also, Tyler Bay looked pretty decent at times. Evan Batty had a redshirt. He was a pretty touted recruit, and they also bring in a very good JUCO player in Shane Gatling, who, I'm going to be completely honest, Shane Gatling barely looked like a MAC level player when I watched him as a freshman at Niagara. I probably saw him 4 times just because I go to all the MAC games and the MAC tournament, etc. And then I see that he's lighting up Indian Hills, which is the best JUCO in the nation. I was like, are you serious? And then I watched his tape. I was like, this just does not look like the same Shane Gatling. But whatever's gotten into him, he looks like a very nice piece for Colorado right now.
It's something about those mountains, because Derek White was a Division II player. He goes to Colorado, and now he's this promising NBA prospect that's on everyone's breakout list before he had the plantar fasciitis. And then George King, who's a guy who I really liked the first time that I really watched him. He's someone who took like the Kelly Olynyk redshirt year, right, where he was healthy but redshirt anyways, and that paid major dividends. He's now on the Phoenix Suns. He was drafted. He has a two-way contract. He's gonna, he's a ideal NBA player for today's kind of multi-positionality. That wing type. I remember Colorado played like the first game of the season on that Friday to I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I remember watching King on that Colorado team. I think they played Wichita State, and I was really high on him as a prospect.
Yeah, no, King was one of those guys who has benefited from the negotiated two-way contracts. But yeah, I mean, Tad Boyle's done a really, really solid job with this program. I mean, he's not a guy who's won a ton, but you always feel like they're competitive every year, and they had like the Spencer Dinwiddie years. But I mean, how do you really see this team? And McKinley Wright was so special. I mean, I don't love the depth that I'm looking at, but they have a chance to be a very interesting college basketball team this year. I know it's hard for me to bet on much more from Wright, and from that perspective, it's hard for me to bet on much more from Colorado, which is why I'm going to have them 8th. But they're a team I want to be higher on than I am.
Yeah, I think that we have a couple pretty much sure things with McKinley Wright and even Naaman Wright, the Missouri transfer, who averaged 9.7 points a game last year. They're probably the starting backcourt. And then you have a lot of guys who had either solid freshman or sophomore seasons, could maybe take a step forward. One guy to watch is Evan Batty, who a lot of people were very upset that he did not qualify. Then he had a stroke in the offseason, I believe. But I think he's good to go in terms of being able to play. He played on the overseas team that's coached by Larry Brown. It's a collection of like 10 college role players that go play a few games in Europe every year. So if he's 100%, he could give them a nice boost in the front court. Guys like Tyler Bay and Deshaun Schwartz are interesting. Maybe potential breakout sophomore candidates at the 3 and the 4. But you're right; they have a lot of guys, but not a lot of proven depth.
Yeah, I would. That's exactly how I would describe it. So they're definitely a team that I mean, McKinley Wright is fun. Like he's Tremont Waters on a team that isn't like going to be clearly good. Like he was appointment television last year to watch, and always makes me wonder what he could have done at Dayton in the A10. But I mean, he's the real deal.
Absolutely. And then I have Colorado 7th and 71st nationally, puts them on that NIT bubble.
Where does it put them, Brad?
On the NIT bubble, right?
All
because
right.
Once you factor in auto bids.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the auto bid it's very interesting. It's going to be it is. I think that's probably the right spot for Colorado. I think, would I be stunned if they wound up on the NCAA bubble? No, I think they could do it, but I would not pick that there preseason. So let us move on to Oregon State. Oregon State continues to kind of flounder under Wayne Tinkle. They were better last season than their putrid 2016-17, but still not very good. 16-16. This feels like a job that could open this year if they can't find a way. To take the next step. Trey Tinkle's really good. They didn't have a ton of depth behind him. Stephen Thompson was pretty solid. They had a nice little core. Ethan Thompson was impressive as well as a freshman. But to me, this team just lacks the overall depth you need to really make any sort of lasting impact in this conference, especially with a coach you don't really believe in.
Yeah, I think that point guard play was a huge issue for them. I know that a lot of people really liked Ja'Cory McLaughlin, a brother of Jordan McLaughlin, I believe, who was supposed to be Oregon State point guard of the future. He leaves after a few games last year, and then the Thompson's going to have to pick up the slack in the backcourt. This is a team that could have really benefited from a grad transfer point guard. I know that they were in on Kristen Cunningham before Louisville kind of turned their attention toward him and ultimately landed Cunningham. Again, I mean, this is very top-heavy roster. It's crazy that, when we were, 2 years ago, and Oregon State was in the NCAA tournament as a 7th seed, I believe, to think that this is where they would end up just 2 years later with all the young talent that they had. It's very, very, very surprising looking back.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a precipitous downfall for this club. And I just don't look at the roster and see guys who I'm confident in taking a big step forward. Antoine Vernon does not seem like the answer at point guard. Neither does really Jordan Campbell, who are the other freshmen. I think they'll probably wind up just playing 2 combo guards and the 2 Thompsons, and then Tinkle is another ball handler. They kind of do the ball handler by committee thing. But then up front without Drew Eubanks, I mean, how much do you really want to rely on Rakocevic? I mean, they have Kyler Kelly, who's a JUCO big man, who's pretty raw, but redshirted last season. Warren Washington coming in as an okay recruit, 6'11", nothing incredibly special though. I mean, it just feels like they have 3 good players, and that's about it.
Yep, and that is just not enough. Especially in a high major league. Even the Pac-12 is considered one of the worst high major leagues, but that's still not enough to make headway.
Yep, I don't really think there's that much more to say. Do you think Wayne Tinkle survives another 500 season in Corvallis?
Tough, because he got them to the NCAA tournament for the first time since like the early 90s, right? So it's going to be tough call. I think if they end up 4-14, I think he's probably gone, because the older Thompson is gone, right? And then Trey Tinkle could be a grad transfer, I believe, right?
He's not going to grad transfer if his dad's the coach.
But if his dad's fired.
Right, but
yeah.
He wouldn't grad transfer without his dad getting fired when they went 4-14.
I know, but I just had a revelation that he was going to be one of the best grad transfers, and I had to say it out loud.
He would be really good if he does grad transfer. He could also just go pro. I mean, I don't know how much of an NBA player he is, but I mean, he's fun in college. What's funny is I was like, who would be the best candidate for Oregon State if they were to open? And I was like, Travis DeCuire would be great. And then I realized, you're probably just not hiring Montana's coach again. You just can't do it.
I mean, you could try Leon Rice.
Yeah.
Or his name Leon Rose or Leon Rice?
Leon Rice. You could also do Otzelberger from South Dakota State. That could work.
That's a good one. Randy Ray, but he's kind of cemented in there, right?
Yeah. Although I think if he gets a job offer, I mean, he interviewed at UTEP last year. I think if he got a job offer from a Power 5, he'd have to take a look very seriously. I mean, you can also look at like a Joe Pasternak, although he's getting implicated a little bit in this testimony. I mean, it'd be an interesting job to watch for sure. Pasternak's a really good recruiter. He'd be fun.
How about, isn't the Ball State coach, isn't he a former Sean Miller assistant from Arizona?
James Whitford, he is indeed, although I believe he actually followed from Xavier. So I don't know that he's actually like recruit. Yeah, he did follow from Xavier. He's also been an assistant at Miami. So he's coached, or Miami of Ohio, excuse me. So he's really more rooted in the Midwest than being a Pac-12 guy. Yeah,
because Ball State could be pretty good this year. They could. I mean, they're not going to make the NCAA tournament probably because Buffalo. I mean, anything could happen with the auto bid, but they could be a top 150 team.
Yeah, they definitely could be. So, I mean, he's going to be a name to watch in a lot of coaching searches. I don't know, maybe like a Big Ten, but I don't know what Big Ten school is going to open. Like maybe Minnesota if Rich Pitino tanks and opens. Yeah, we'll see. Whitford's definitely a rising name in college basketball, though. So definitely a good name to bring up, Brad. Let's move on. Final 2 teams to get to. Washington State, 12-19, 4-14. They lose Malachi Flynn. They bring back Carter Skaggs. Robert Franks came back after planning to leave. I will say Washington State ran my favorite play in college basketball last season. I was watching, I forget who they were playing, but they had Drick Bernstein, who was like a point center where he could pass the ball a little bit. And since they didn't really have their good ball.
He's big, could handle the ball.
Yeah. And so they ran a few times last year. This play where Drick Bernstein would have the ball and they would do a pick and pop where Malachi Flynn would set a screen. and then pop to the 3-point line and hope to get the switch. And then either Bernstein would take the smaller guy off the bounce, or he would pass it to Flynn, who would just attack a smaller guy or attack a bigger guy or shoot over. And it was so fun. It was my favorite set in college basketball. Otherwise, Ernie Kent, I just don't think you're the man for the job. I'm sorry.
Yeah, when they hired him, it raised a lot of eyebrows, and a lot of the national media was kind of like, yeah, think about who turned down the job if Washington State ended up with Ernie Kent. Like this is what was left.
Yeah, they're pretty reliant this year on JUCO players. They also have a good JUCO group coming in the following year with Darren Henson and Ryan Murphy. But this JUCO group, the next couple of years, is going to be important. Ernie Kent has a ridiculous contract that probably will keep him in place as the head coach after the season, despite just not winning. Because if you're Washington State and you're already not, flush with cash, you're not buying out a football coach or a basketball coach at a football school. So they're going to roll with these JUCO guys. Ahmed Ali is going to be really, I think he's going to be pretty good at point guard. They also had Jervay Robinson, Isaiah Wade. So they'll be, and Marvin Cannon as well. So those JUCO guys have to keep you interesting. But when you have Malachi Flynn and Robert Franks and you still go 4-14, I just don't see how you improve on that total without Malachi Flynn and a bunch of unknown JUCOs.
Yeah, Franks is actually really good. I mean, he's someone, when I watched him for the first time, I was surprised at just how good he is, and the stats that he put up last season accurately kind of portray his talent. Malachi Flynn is an enormous loss. They can't recover from that. But they're rolling the dice with all these JUCO guys, similar to what Tubby Smith did last year at Memphis. Didn't really work, although they did have some solid holdovers for this year, like Kyvon Davenport. But I mean, Washington State's going to try to do the JUCO roll of the dice. If 2 or 3 of these guys can stick, maybe Washington State can climb a couple spots. But I have them at 11th.
Yeah, I have them at 12, mostly because I'm a little higher on Cal, but I mean, it's a toss-up between those two teams. I would tend to agree. Let us move on to our final team to preview before we quickly run through those standings and our all-conference teams. First, it is Cal. Justice Suing and Darius McNeil were bright spots in an otherwise unfortunate first season for Wyking Jones. He had to pick up the pieces from a really mess left behind by Quanzo Martin. They lose Marcus Lee. They lose Don Coleman. Coleman transferring as a sit one, play one to South Alabama, which just I don't get for the life of me. But hey, if you want to give up your Cal Berkeley degree to go play 1 year after sitting 1 year at the University of South Alabama when you were going to be a featured player on this Cal team, be my guest. It's not my life. Anywho, Cal is going to be pretty bad again. I think that is fair to say. It's a better recruiting class, and Wyking Jones can recruit. I mean, he's going to get kids into the program. They've got a good class coming in next year with Joel Brown and Charles Smith already committed, as well as DJ Thorpe. But it's going to take time. Good thing is he's got 2 guys he can build around in McNeil and Suing, and just wonder, does he have enough time to really put that together? He was never really the favorite choice to begin with for this job, and I think that does factor in.
I believe he was hired because Cal is short on money, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they didn't put up a good enough package for Musselman, was the discussion, at least.
Yeah, but they lose their best player in Marcus Lee. They lose their leading scorer in Don Coleman. They were very bad last year. They will be very bad again this year. I do like McNeil. Paris Austin was he's probably a top 25 sit-out transfer. Solid player at Boise State. It was a shame he transferred because Boise State with him last year would have been an NCAA tournament team most likely. With Chandler Hutchinson and Justinian Jessup, Christian Senkfelder. They were missing that lead guard, and that was Paris Austin, who left to play for the bottom 2 team in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I think Paris Austin's being overrated. He was not a good shooter at Boise State. He's kind of that speedy slashing point guard. I think he'll be pretty solid for this team, but I don't know. I don't think he's like a impact Pac-12 player. I will say that.
Do you think he's better than Mikey Dixon for St. John's? Because I ranked them in my top 40 transfers. I ranked Austin one spot ahead of Dixon.
I think that that's tough. I watched a lot of Mikey Dixon, and I kind of bought in, but he was on a much worse team than Paris Austin. I think you have to bet. I think you have to say Paris Austin is better right now than Mikey Dixon is, but Dixon's really good. I will just kind of put that out there.
Cool. I guess so far so good.
There you go. It will be interesting to kind of look back on those lists and see where you went wrong. I think you did a pretty good job, though. Anything else we want to touch on with this Cal team that is just not overly interesting this season?
Who do you think starts at center?
I think they're going to go with the super slender but super good shooting Connor Vanover, the freshman. That's kind of been the discussion. I know that was a Rothstein report that he was going to be pretty good. So I'll bet on him.
The guy Roman Davis, he's like their most experienced player. Right? He's like a redshirt junior.
Yeah, let me just pull that up. I had it and I lost it. Roman Davis is a redshirt junior, yes.
Yeah, so he averaged. I mean, he was their like 8th leading scorer at 1.9 points a game last year, which is very uncommon. As a team, they average 68 points a game. Most teams are up in that 75 to 80 range. It's going to be tough again for Cal this year.
Yeah, it is not good. I give Wyking Jones credit for doing his best, and he's fighting in a tough situation, and we'll see what he can do, see if he can build momentum. Now that he has David Grace on staff, I feel a little better about them being able to consistently recruit at a high level. So we'll see. I mean, Wyking's going to do what he can in a tough spot at Cal. Let's run through our standings projections. We've kind of touched on each team individually. Let's go through it. I had Oregon 1, Washington at number 2, USC at 3. I think that's probably the pretty clear top 3 in some order. Arizona at 4, UCLA 5, Stanford at 6, Arizona State at 7, Colorado at 8. I think that's a fairly clear tier as well. Utah and Oregon State, their own tier at 9 and 10, and then Cal and Washington State to wrap it up at 11 and 12.
So I have Oregon at 1, Washington at 2, USC at 3, Arizona State at 4, UCLA 5, Arizona 6, Colorado 7, Stanford 8, Oregon State 9, Utah 10, Cal 11, and Washington State. Oh, no, sorry, that was a late switch. I have Washington State at 11 and Cal at 12.
All right. Who do you have as your player of the year? So many of these top guys have departed, but who's your player of the year in this conference?
I just went with best player, best team, Peyton Pritchard.
I think I'm going to go with Benny Boatwright. I think he's going to have a big year. Without some of these guys around him like Metu. Not that those guys are hurting him, but they were just kind of holding back his production. I think that's still really good. I think Benny Boatwright or sneaky pick Kevin Porter.
I think another potential pick could be Noah Dickerson. Or even Chris Wilkes, too.
Yeah. No, I think those are all really fair picks. I mean, my first team, I think, would be Boatwright, Dickerson, Chris Wilkes, Peyton Pritchard, and then the fifth spot's tough. I think I'll go Dejon Davis for the last spot.
If I had that same 4, struggled with the 5th, I went with Jalen Noel. You could go Davis easily. You could go McKinley Wright. You could, depending on the stats that a Robert Franks or a Trey Tinkle put up, you could go with them too.
Yeah, no, Tinkle's team's going to be bad, same with Franks, but they're going to be really good players, so they could sneak on to the first team. I'm pretty sure the Pac-12 does one of those weird first teams that doesn't include 5 players. So
Jesus.
So stupid. How many bids are we looking at from this league, and which ones? For you, I got 4, just my top 4. Oregon, Washington, USC, Arizona, UCLA, Stanford, Arizona State, and Colorado all have a chance, but would not be in my field as of today.
So I have 6 bids. I have Oregon, Washington, USC, Arizona State, UCLA, and Arizona. Colorado and Stanford being in the NIT. 71 and 76 nationally puts them in jeopardy of missing the NIT when you factor in the auto bids, because usually there's only 5.5 seed lines of at-large for the NIT.
Mm-hmm. No, I would be surprised if this league gets 6 bids. I will put that out there.
Well, in terms of, teams like Arizona and UCLA have the very high variance. And then I like Arizona State. We touched on that earlier, but I would certainly take Arizona State over, teams like Missouri, Notre Dame, Seton Hall, other teams that could be in that mix. So I think that this is I think 3 to 6 is probably your range. I think you can have no less than 3, no more than 6.
Yeah, definitely all the teams you said, like, it wouldn't surprise me. It was just like the 6 total seems like a big number. But it's not. I don't think it's crazy by any means. I think it's pretty reasonable. Anything else, Brad, before we wrap up this Pac-12 podcast?
Nope.
All right, then we will sign off. Appreciate you all checking it out. Please give us punch that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you are listening. Please subscribe. Give us a nice review. We really do appreciate it. We will be back at some point soon-ish with the rest of our preview series, probably mid-majors next, Brad. We'll kind of figure out when that one comes out, as it is a busy time for me. I'm sure Brad has things to do as well, but we will try to get that to you as soon as we can. As soon as we record it, we will get it out to you guys. Hopefully sometime this week. We will see what happens. Thank you all for listening, and have a great night.